Citizen Talks is a podcast series featuring discussions with humanitarians, activists, artists, and changemakers, exploring the global humanitarian issues that shape our society, the world at large. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Citizen Talks. We are joined today by Christopher Dekki, who is a longtime environmental policy advocate. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start by just giving a little bit of background on you for our listeners who aren't familiar with you and your work. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I actually started in this space doing policy advocacy, working with youth-led organizations. I was kind of coordinating a large number of youth-led organizations in New York at the UN. I had the luck of being from New York based, so I kind of had that access to the UN while others were probably just dreaming of going there. So I was working with youth organizations and I was in school and I was trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, and I really started to enjoy being in these policy spaces because the UN system does permit constituency groups, rights-based holder groups, to access the UN and engage in negotiations around environmental issues. This comes from the Earth Summit back in Rio in 1992, when they were starting to form a lot of these agreements on climate change, biodiversity, sustainable development. They were all born out of that Rio process. And so these platforms gave the right to young people, women, indigenous peoples to be engaged in these processes, and that's how I kind of got my start. And little by little, I was engaging in the UN system, working as a consultant at one point, working in NGOs, back and forth between the UN and the NGOs. Some might call that a revolving door, but it is what it is. And now I'm back working in the NGO space, doing advocacy in the climate change processes and other UN environmental processes.
Okay, so I want to start with a question I think is relevant to both of our fields, environment and the media. So we live in the information age, and we all, of course, know terms like misinformation, disinformation now. And we've got, any number of conspiracy theories out there. We have the flat earthers, we have the moon landing deniers, and of course the climate change is a hoax people. And this is really a narrative that's been picking up steam a lot in the recent past, especially with, Trump and these kinds of political philosophies. So I want to set the record straight here for our audience members. What is the most clear data and environmental factors that we can point to that is demonstrating clearly that climate change is real and it is having an impact on our planet right now?
I mean, it's very easy to, I think, bore people with data and statistics and kind of point to the research that scientists are doing. But I think it's much easier to just look at the way things have been in the past few years in terms of just temperature increase, sea level rise that's coming from melting glaciers, and just the fact that so many places are now at an even greater risk of climate related impacts and natural disasters. Hurricane seasons are lasting longer. I can keep saying all these things, and for the most part I think people intrinsically get it. But then I think what we really are dealing with here is just a massive propaganda barrage on people's senses. This denialism of climate change, this anti-environmental, state of being that people seem to have. It's a very almost Western phenomenon. Most of the world, in some shape or form, believes that climate change is real and trusts the science. People have this impression that Muslim countries, for example, they're religious, so they must be even more anti-climate change or against the idea that climate change is real. But in fact, it's not a problem in so many places. It's in fact in Western societies that we see this really like vociferous belief that climate change is a hoax. So you can point to the data, point to the realities that people are experiencing on the day-to-day basis all over the world and the massive impacts we're experiencing from climate change. But we can also just say that, look, this is a non-issue in so many places. I had somebody in my community who could not believe that last year I was working for the COP28 presidency. They're like, the UAE believes in climate change? And this person works in the government in the US. This is somebody who actually has a role to play in making policy, and he couldn't believe that an oil-producing Muslim nation like the United Arab Emirates would take the mantle of the presidency, of the leadership of the climate change conference in the UN, because they're so deluded into believing so much of this propaganda.
Yeah.
So, I would push back on that and say a lot of this is really just coming from a specific place and a specific group of people who somehow managed to create a large echo chamber of noise that ignores science and ignores reality and ignores just the general consensus that exists all over the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's a bit ironic that the philosophy is often attached to a desire to continue to exploit without restriction. As if the planet is made of infinite resources. You just keep digging and it just keeps replenishing itself. It's like magic, But we know that that's not true. There's only a finite level of resources on the planet, and this is just reality. And for some reason, we don't like to admit reality. So let's continue down that vein a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we hear also from similar characters a lot of rumors about sort of these sound dystopian but these kinds of plans to reduce climate impact. Mm-hmm. Things like 15-minute cities with restrictions on movement, limitations on transportation generally, restrictions on consumption of certain foods, meats, etc. Some of these concepts, if you believe them, they sound tyrannical, right? You can't do this, you can't drive that, you can't go there, you can't eat this. And that's, of course, how they're portrayed in the sort of darker, conspiracy-focused corners of the internet. So how much of these concepts and these policies planned for the future are actually legitimate? And, what's the line here between fact and fiction? And on a societal level, realistically, what kinds of compromises will we most likely be asked to make to achieve a more sustainable sort of development ongoing into the future?
It's really funny because I didn't realize that urban planning was tyrannical.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that better urban planning, like making cities more livable and communities more livable, was tyrannical. I mean, it's just this, again, it goes back to what you were asking me before, kind of this echo chamber of dystopian nonsense. They really want to pretend like making people's lives better is somehow taking away their rights. You had mentioned that the 15-minute city is meant to be a limit on things, a limit on people doing X or Y, but in reality, it's not. The concept of the 15-minute city is that to make things planned better, this concept of what we would call transport-oriented development, so that urban planning is actually planned around transport nodes and hubs where public transport kind of plays a central role in getting people around. In the West, we tend to think that the car is king, right?
Right.
But the car has only been king because it was a push from certain corporate interests to make sure that our urban planning was very much centered around private vehicles, right? And we see that now propagated all over the United States, and in some ways being pushed on other countries as a way of kind of locking cities into these very vehicle-oriented forms of movement. I would say, if someone ever asked me, like, this is so bad, this is so dystopian, taking away people's rights, again, I would just say again, is urban planning dystopian? Is urban planning tyrannical? Is it bad to make a city more convenient to get around, more accessible for people, and more affordable? Because that's part of this whole attempt to kind of evolve the way we live in urban areas. Now, you had mentioned also meat eating, right?
Right.
I mean, I would just, again, ask people, has there been any effort by the system in which we live to limit how much meat or what people eat on a daily basis? I mean, I don't understand where these I mean, I do understand where these ideas come from, but at the same time, it's like, has your life changed at all
Yeah.
in many places where apparently these things are being pushed?
Yeah.
And it just isn't the case. But we do know the science, and we do know that certain ways of living are more impactful on the environment. But unfortunately, people who want to, again, promote the propaganda, who want to sway how the average person thinks, they're going to try to make these things seem like they're
Right.
the most horrible things in the world. And honestly, a lot of interests, particularly corporate interests, benefit very much from the status quo,
Right.
right? Because in the end, the way to really decarbonize the planet is primarily about people from the upper echelons of our planet changing their lifestyles.
Right. Right. Right.
And not so much about the average Joe, the working class person, changing their much less emitting lifestyle.
Right.
So we really are seeing this clash where equity and justice is being sacrificed in a sense so that certain levels of our society can continue living as they please.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways to look at it.
I want to talk about that actually a little bit more because I feel like in popular culture, the sort of framing of reducing climate impact is always focused on individual responsibility, right? You know, recycle at home, drink out of paper straws, etc. When we, I think, know very clearly that the biggest contributors to pollution are, you know, multinational corporations and nation states. What's the deal with that? What's the deal with this kind of push for take individual responsibility and you know, forget about what these guys are doing over here, these people who are actually, you know, dumping a ton of pollution all over the environment consistently for hundreds of years since before the Industrial
For
Revolution.
the benefit of shareholders.
Right.
I can sum it up in one word, and it's greenwashing, right? Like, it's very easy to kind of push the onus of saving the world on, again, the average Joe and his or her behavior. The average Joe, the average Jane, however you want to see it.
Right.
And make it about them. You know, it's not about us over here who are, as they say, there's a lot of talk now about people on private jets. And that's
Right.
good, because if you are using a private jet very often, you are clearly having a much larger impact on the environment than like, you
Yeah.
know, some person in Bangkok.
Shout out to
drinking
Leonardo
juice out of a
DiCaprio.
straw. Right. You know, it's very common to see someone in Bangkok drinking out of a plastic straw, but you know, they're the problem, not the person on the private jet, right? So
Right.
it's this effort to kind of distract attention from certain strata of society. You know, the fact that corporate interests do make a great deal of money from the status quo, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And making people think that they're the problem.
Yeah.
And what they do affects the environment in such a way that we all have to now change our behaviors and do things that in many ways don't have any impact. Of course, it's good to do little things here and there. You can make plastic less easily available, which is really important because we're seeing how the world is drowning in plastic, and currently the negotiations on the plastic treaty are actually happening right now.
Okay.
And they're stalling. But yeah, I really do think it's an attempt to distract and to greenwash.
Yeah.
And to just make people think that, you know, they're the problem, when in reality, we kind of know who the problem is, and we just have to kind of pull their masks off.
Yeah.
And kind of see them for what they are and the impacts they have on all of our lives.
Yeah.
Because in the end, the most affected by the impacts of climate change are the regular people, especially people in the global south and developing countries who are most highly impacted by the behaviors of certain elites in our world.
Yeah.
And the unmatched consumption that they do on a daily basis. It's just, if you think about it, it's just insane to think about the difference between an average person, let's say in Sierra Leone, and the emissions that they produce on a daily basis versus somebody living in a penthouse apartment somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, living a very grandiose
Right.
life, this life of extreme privilege. We can easily say that, oh, those people are throwing plastic on the street or they're throwing their garbage on the floor. There's always those people doing something, but let's not think about those other people
Right.
who are living this life of pure privilege.
Right. So at a policy level, do you feel like there's a recognition of this fact, when you're talking about geopolitical actors working together, or is it the case that, that sort of strata of our society as well has been completely co-opted, because many of those people are members of that class that you mentioned, right? So is there like a realistic conversation happening there that, listen, we need to focus on the people who are actually causing the problem, or is it like, no, let's make people, drink out of paper straws?
I mean, you could look at this in two ways. Let's start with the policy, the policy way. There has been attempts in certain places to kind of make a change by, let's say, taxing billionaires. So the outgoing presidency of the G20 is Brazil. And Fernando Haddad, the finance minister, of Brazil, has been keen on ensuring that there's a recognition of the need to tax extreme wealth around the world and to make sure that some of that wealth is then properly used by the public purse to actually do things for the population. That has been one of the big fights that Brazil has been pushing in the G20. In the UN, you have this entire conversation about climate finance, where developing countries, at COP29 especially, and over the past several months, have been really making the case that rich countries, developed countries, they have the money, they're just not mobilizing it correctly to make sure that developing countries are getting the money they need to transform their economies. And some sources are saying that we need over $1 trillion a year to actually ensure that we can achieve the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. So we're really seeing that money is needed, and people recognize that the money is there, it's just not being extracted from the right sources and the right people.
Yeah.
In the UN as well, we're seeing efforts to now push for the negotiations process, a negotiation process around the UN Tax Convention to kind of democratize how global taxation works. Because for so many years, the OECD, rich countries, the countries of the global north, as we say, have been really dominant in terms of how global tax policy works. And that has been mostly to the benefit of those countries and their elites, right? Their corporate interests and the like. So now there's this effort to democratize it through a tax convention. And now we're seeing the next round of the financing for sustainable development process on its way, with negotiations happening now, trying to change the nature of how aid and development aid and climate financing, how multilateral development banks work. There's an attempt to really change the nature of the game when it comes to money and finance. And we're seeing that happening in the policy side. Now, on the action side, because many of these UN processes have the policy space and the action space, how you mobilize actors to do certain things or to change certain behaviors for the better of the planet. And there's a lot of businesses, and I've been sitting here attacking the private sector, but there are a lot of private sector entities that are making an effort to change the way they do things. You're seeing a growth now in organizations that are mobilizing renewables companies, like companies that specialize in renewable energy to kind of scale up their activities. You're seeing efforts by national oil companies to actually abate the amount of methane that comes out of their operations on a day-to-day basis, because methane is actually a more dangerous greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And you're seeing these commitments being made in key spaces in the UN processes. And I think it's leading to shifts in understanding and how the private sector can possibly play a better role in ensuring that we can achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And beyond that, you have public sector entities coming together in this action space to kind of change the way things are done. You're seeing this explosion of public transport being electrified. So the shifts are taking place. It just doesn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about something like reforming multilateral development banks, this is something that we talk about a lot in the UN space. changing the global financial architecture. That takes a long time.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about financial systems that have been in place since Bretton Woods, the early 20th century, and then slowly evolving into what we have today, suddenly now having to go through a shift and in order to be fixed in some way. And somebody who's been really pushing for this is the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. She's been one of the big, I would say, champions of reforming the global financial architecture. And it's happening, but I think the way the world is enduring crises right now, it probably tends to make people feel like we're just headed towards Armageddon.
Yeah.
But things are happening.
Yeah.
I would never be defeatist in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about a specific area of environmental impact that you mentioned actually, which would be transportation. I guess that would be connected very much with fossil fuels. But what are the big climate impacts of our modern transportation system from the production level all the way down to the level of actual use, implementation? And how can we create a more environmentally sustainable transportation infrastructure?
This is a very complex question.
Okay, give us the overview. Give us the broad overview.
Partially, it's very complex because transport is multimodal.
Right.
I can easily tell you that about a fourth of our emissions globally come from transport systems. And then I can break that down a little more. Like, for example, the global shipping industry, the maritime industry, is 3% of global emissions, which is essentially I think they say equal to what Germany emits. So you're talking about a massive economy, but put that into one mode of transport.
And that's just for fueling ships and the gas that they're using for
activities. So the whole nature of the shipping industry, maritime transport. So transport in and of itself is a complex space because anything from people walking on the street, like the active mobility element of transport, to people flying on planes, that all kind of is bundled together. And this is a space I've worked in for many years. So that's why I'm telling you it's so complicated.
Of course.
I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, because a large chunk of our emissions actually come from land transport. People love to talk about planes and shame people for flying on planes, but it's actually land transport that emits the majority of emissions from transport systems. And a big chunk of that comes from freight transport. So our systems of trade and getting goods and services from one place to another. So honestly, if I were to say, let's transform our transport systems, I would start with our land transport systems, ensuring that we find ways to get people out of private vehicles in northern cities in the global north, to enhance public transport systems, to make it easier for people to get to one place to another where they don't need to just get into a car, but actually have options, not to be tyrannical, but to have options from getting to one place to another that is accessible, affordable, comfortable, right? I mean, I live in New York City. I think our public transport system is pretty good. I don't have a car. I don't want to have a car. And I'm quite happy with the fact that I can get from one place to another for very cheap and very easily without the stress of road rage. Because traffic is terrible in New York. But a lot of people, for some reason, don't appreciate that, or they live in a place where the access is just terrible, right? And that's been the case in the US for a very long time. You've had actual corporate interests preventing legislation being passed that would have expanded access to public transport in cities all over the country. There are examples from places in Tennessee, I'm forgetting which city it is now, either it might be Nashville, and other cities around the country in which you actually saw corporate interests rallying together and creating a propaganda machine, telling people that this legislation that would actually enhance their public transport systems is here to take away their cars and their freedom.
Right.
It's just, you're fighting against this kind of insane machine of propaganda. But I think that's really the best way to decarbonize our transport systems. Another thing is to think about is expanding rail access, because trains are probably the most efficient, most clean way of getting from one place to another. Unfortunately, railroad systems are very expensive to maintain. They require a lot of technical expertise. But as I was saying before, the money is there. Just you need the political will to make sure that these systems actually get built and enhanced. You know, the U.S. for many years, I think even back when Obama was running for president the first time around, there were these plans that were being released for U.S. high-speed rail.
Yeah.
And then they just disappeared.
Yeah, I remember that actually. And the California hyperlink too.
Oh. Well, there is progress being made, but it's going so slowly.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you have other countries that are just building maglev train systems in no time. It's really interesting. But, you know, the money exists. We have the money. It's just we're not mobilizing it correctly. Our budgets are being used on other things.
Yeah.
You know very well. You know, we just have to make sure the political will is there and the interest is there to make our lives better.
Right.
Because
right.
these things will ultimately make our lives better. I love the fact that I can, you know, if I have to go to a meeting in DC, just walk across town where I live, and I'm privileged enough to live in Manhattan. I'm not pretending like everybody can do that. But walk across town, get on the train, be in DC in 3 hours, go to my meeting, get back on the train, be home for dinner, right? Like,
right.
But that's the beauty of a strong, accessible public transport system.
Yeah.
Now, those trains could, of course, be much better in the US. They really could be. But at least they exist in some parts of the country.
Yeah.
And I think people need to actually see the value of these things. And they could if there wasn't the echo chamber we've been talking about.
Right, right.
Since we started this conversation.
No.
Because that's really what is somehow convincing people that what's actually good for them is taking away their freedom.
So can you give us an idea of what like the idealized kind of transportation infrastructure would be? Would it be in your mind, and it's heavily rail-based, and we're talking about like maglev type transportation, or what would that kind of system?
I mean, it's very easy to say we're going to have this perfect utopian city of the future.
Right.
You know, sometimes people forget that, you know, trains, like I said before, are really expensive. So, you know, but buses, really cheap, super efficient.
So in relation to, like, let's talk about this, for example, buses, right? Specifically vehicles. You know, what is the sort of reality of the sustainability of electric vehicles, for example? Because we know that while in a sort of, you know, philosophically or conceptual way, the idea sounds cool, but in terms of the production of an electric vehicle, there's so much environmental degradation, and there's also exploitation of people for certain very
mineral
resources, etc. So is that a reality that would be part of this ideal transportation system, or are electric vehicles like bad in your mind?
You want my ideal transport system?
Yeah.
It's mass transit for the most number of people at the most efficient and accessible and comfortable way possible. Simple as that.
Okay.
Now, does that mean it has to be a beautiful train system with gorgeous metro stations? No. But it should be a bus system.
Yeah.
For sure. That's like the basic minimum, where people can have comfortable waiting times, not waiting too long in a place that protects them from the sun or from rain, where the buses are comfortable, maybe have like some outlets for people to charge their phones, because obviously in an urban environment, most people are going to have a cell phone.
Right.
Where the people feel safe, you know, like where they don't feel like they're in danger of being attacked, especially for women and girls, or for children even. These are things that really matter. So what's ideal in one place may not be ideal in another, or may not be realistic in another. And that's why I think that the concepts are what matter. The concepts of having accessible, affordable, comfortable, safe public transport systems is really the ideal. And it may look one way in one place and one way in another place, but that's fine. And couple that with the ability to actually do active mobility for walking, cycling, you know, so that if people can go from one place to another on their feet and they want to walk, it should be safe and comfortable, and they should be able to see nice things on the way there. And, you know, there should be street lights is like the most common thing to say, like,
Yeah.
you know, making sure that they have the ability to actually have the choice.
Yeah.
Because people love to talk about how these things take away choice, but in fact, they actually increase choice.
Right.
And then if people want to drive because maybe they're an older person or, you know, they're a big family, of course they should have the right to do that, but the other modes should be expanded so that more people can find those modes of getting from one place to another more desirable.
Okay.
And that's what we're, I think, getting at here with the start of our conversation about the tyrannical 15-minute
Right.
city and all that. It's really about expanding choice. Because I just think about people living in different parts of the United States where I grew up, and just the devastating anger they endure on a daily basis driving.
Yeah.
Even in big cities that have good public transport, many people still get in their car, living in downtown neighborhoods of big cities in the US, and will want to drive to go to work. And as they're driving, they're cursing, they're screaming, they're beeping. But at the same time, it is incumbent on the state to make sure that the other options are desirable, are accessible, are comfortable.
Right.
So, I mean, I remember seeing this ad from maybe 10 years now from Copenhagen, from Denmark somewhere, where there was this commercial. People were like touching the bus and the bus driver was like going like this. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's this push to kind of change people's perceptions of a bus. But, I mean, it kind of has to be, I think, rolled out a bit more so that there's an appreciation for our common public goods.
Yeah.
And not just, you know, let me get in my car to go 10 minutes away or something. Like, we have to appreciate what we have as societies.
Okay, cool. So, speaking, sort of reaching a kind of general conclusion here to some of this conversation, and the objective here, right, is to reverse all of the terrible damage that we've done to the environment and to move forward in a more sustainable way. Do you believe that a reversion of the environmental devastation we've caused on the planet is possible? And in this question, I don't want to imagine a utopia where everybody acts in everyone else's best interest just because, you know, they want the best for all of humanity. I want to talk about the real world that we live in, where there's competition for resources and the desire to acquire wealth. You know, where we have some bad actors who simply don't care about everyone else, where we have less developed societies who want to achieve the same lifestyle as more developed societies, which they gain through very destructive
Colonialism.
Right, and very destructive industrial processes over many, many years, decades, centuries. Will it really be possible to get the world to act collectively to solve this problem with so many contradictory motivations? And do we have time to make that to make a difference, really?
Well, I'm certainly not a utopian. Like, I'm not trying to be utopian at all. I'm very much a pragmatist.
Right.
And the spaces I work in is about pragmatism, right? You got to deal with real people with real interests, representing real countries with real interests. And so being pragmatic is critical to, I think, making at least somewhat of a difference in global policy spaces, negotiations at the global level. But I think there needs to be a revitalization of our multilateral system. You know, part of what the UN Secretary General was doing last year in hosting what was called the Summit of the Future was to kind of revitalize multilateralism. And some of the outcomes that came out of the Pact for the Future tried to do that, and let's see where they take us. But I think the multilateral system, as a pragmatic, realist way of dealing with international relations, needs to kind of be rejigged a bit. You know, unfortunately, we're in a moment of intense geopolitical conflict. We're seeing these extreme rightward shifts, in so many countries around the world. And I'm not saying that the rightward shift is the fault of the population. No, I think we had mentioned before when we were chatting before about the Overton window. Right? So we're seeing kind of like the baseline moving to the right.
Right.
And a lot of that is a reaction to neoliberal economic systems that have, in many ways, devastated people's lives and the planet. So we kind of need a reconfiguration of multilateralism and a reconfiguration of the way countries deal with one another. And And I think we're seeing a new world trying to be born. We've existed, we've lived in a hegemonic system for a very long time. I come from that hegemonic system as a US citizen, but I think we're starting to see that a new world with more multipolarity is coming up. And what I would want to see is, as that new multipolar world is born, because it is being born, it doesn't just exist to screw one party against another or to become the new hegemon, but to actually embrace a new multilateralism. Because in the end, we are seeing little clues that the multilateral system matters for people, whether it's the case against Israel in the ICJ or the ICC putting out arrest warrants, or very intense negotiations in the climate change process, especially recently at COP29, push by Global South countries to actually get negotiations on a UN tax convention. This shows that people still value the multilateral system. But as I said before, as this new world is born, we need to make sure that multilateralism, where people have a forum to come together and argue our issues, is actually robust, is strong, is meaningful, and leads to good outcomes for all of us. Because the military conflict that we're experiencing in so many places is not only killing people, but it's also killing the environment.
Yeah.
We're seeing the devastation that's happening in Gaza, biodiversity loss, the destruction of farmland, ancient olive groves being destroyed. That's not even just about people's lives, it's also about the sustainability of the land.
Yeah.
Because if the war ever comes to an end, how is that land ever going to be used again? So it's just, there needs to be a shift, because the planet can only take so much. And at some point, we could reach what's called tipping points.
Yeah.
Where Mother Nature kind of just accepts what we've done to her, and then she evolves.
Yeah.
But the way she may evolve may not be so good for us.
Gonna do something back to us,
right.
Basically.
The planet is nature is much more flexible and malleable than our existence in it.
Yeah.
So if Mother Nature decides she needs to change, well, God bless us.
We'll deal with it. I guess, it is what it is.
So yeah, I really do believe in the multilateral system and want it to improve, and hope that we can find a way to make it better.
Okay, so what are you optimistic about in efforts towards sustainable development? Like what does give you hope?
I would say that in places all over the world, you are seeing kind of awakening of the average person. Yeah, I know that there's this kind of rightward shift, but I think people are realizing that something is not right.
Yeah.
Something is just not working out for them.
The zeitgeist has gotten a little weird.
But I think for the most part, people are having this awakening that I think can be used for a positive outcome. Now, I know it might seem that at the moment, it's just doom and gloom, right? But I think that awakening, especially among people in the West, because the West is the current hegemonic system. And for people to have that awakening, I just want to see that awakening channeled towards a more positive outcome. And I think people are inherently good. I'm not this kind of person who thinks that people are just inherently bad. I don't think that's true at all. I think just people have difficult circumstances and they make the best of it. But the fact that people are noticing that the circumstances are the result of bad politics tells you something about the way the world can shift in the future. And I hope that they put their energy and time and resources into finding the source of their problems instead of just blaming other human beings for their problems.
Yeah.
Because in the end, poverty, environmental degradation, these are the results of political choices. It's very easy, especially in the West, for us to blame poverty on people's personal circumstances. It kind of goes back to what we were saying before. Like the environment is bad because of you. But we always forget that it is the result of political activity, the result of politics, that certain things are the way they are. They're political choices that create X and Y outcomes. And other political choices can create Z outcomes. But we just have to make those political choices. And I do think that as people wake up to the reality, as the world balances out a bit, as things shift, I hope the right choices are made so that all of us can just have a better future.
Okay. So before we conclude here, do you have any words, final words for our listeners that you would like to leave them with, something to, walk away from this with, maybe some kind of actions they can take or whatever it might be?
It's very easy to tell people, go vote, go do this, go do that. That's what's going to save us. But sometimes I think it's less about going to do something and more about reflecting, reading, listening. I think we've really lost our desire to learn in some ways, to learn more about the world around us, about the people around us. And so it's not just about going and doing something, it's about taking a step back and listening and reading and learning and being more analytical and thinking more critically, because ultimately that activity is going to make you better at the acts and the actions you do in your daily life. Because sometimes you just need to slow down and take a breath and reflect. And that's not happening enough, I think. Because the world is the way it is, it's go, go, go. Who has time to read, and who has time to listen, and who has time to think too much? And I don't blame people for that. Life's expensive, I get it.
Yeah.
And it's expensive, like I said before, because of political choices. But I would really advise people to slow down, listen, read, and think.
That's good advice. Christopher Dekki, thank you so much for joining us here today. If anybody wants to connect with you or find out about some of the things you're working on, where can they go to do that?
You can find me on Instagram at VeggieVagabond with a
what is it, underscore?
underscore.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great.
And on LinkedIn as well. I primarily use Instagram and LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I'm not super social media oriented, but happy to
Okay.
chat with people if they have questions.
Wonderful. So thank you again for being here. And for all of our listeners, thanks for joining us. And we hope to see you again next time on another episode of Citizen Talks.